Hi beautiful souls, it's Tan here again today with another video on this astrology channel for you. And today we're going to be talking about Pluto in the 8th house. And this is the last of the Pluto through the houses video in this series. So I've made a Pluto introduction video and I would highly recommend that you check out that video first to kind of get a comprehensive understanding of my interpretation of Pluto and how Pluto can be both your darkness and lightness. And you can come back and watch this video. So when you have Pluto in the 8th house, your biggest transformation is coming from the ability to be secure with your inner power. And this is going to be a long journey. It's going to be a cyclic process of transformation that you will have to go through in order to discover that inner power. So yes, the 8th house ultimately rules power. And when you have Pluto in this house, you're going to come into this particular life, in this, if you believe in a past life, this particular incarnation of being somebody who is already going to have an understanding. And of course, this may happen at any time in your life, like in your 20s or maybe it's in your 30s, to have a full grasp of the limit of your power. Meaning that there's going to be a pretty clear or a pretty well-defined, determined ability to feel and to understand and to experience who you are in totality with regards to the limit of who you are as well. So the experience of power comes from first knowing who you are. But you're somebody who's gonna want to search even more because you also would like to know who you are not. So it's this really interesting journey of breaking the glass ceiling of who you feel like you are. So this comes with questions that you may ask, like, what do I not yet have? Who am I not yet are, or who have I not yet become? So when you ask these particular questions and when you want to break your limitations and break that glass ceiling, you will begin to experience powerlessness because you're experiencing what you're not. It's kind of like the, Pluto does represent wholeness in astrology. And I'm thinking here as I'm speaking of the yin and yang symbol. And when you look at the yin and yang symbol, you may have a very good grasp of the power of one of them. Possibly, the yang energy that you may experience at first. But to feel whole, that you have to fill in the other parts of who you may not yet be, so that yin energy, this is kind of just an analysis that I'm making here, but yes, that is what could happen. So you want to be able to transform those things that gives you a sense of powerlessness and turn them into power or empowerment. So in order to do this, in order to discover who you not yet are, you may feel compelled to dwell into universal symbols of power and to see if you have yet experienced these universal symbols of power to its totality. And these universal symbols of power include sex, includes understanding death of all types, an ability to share joint finances with another person, things that are considered taboo like magic or the occult, and even things like the government or politics, especially when it comes to what's behind the scenes, corruption, what's not transparent in these particular systems. Because if we look at these examples, they all represent, at the bottom of them, they represent trust and deep bonding. Because if you don't trust another, you're not going to get to have that, full, total sexual experience. If you don't trust and bond with another, you're not going to feel like you want to share your resources and finances with them. If you don't trust your government or your politicians, then we have a problem. Trusting of something like the occult or the magic and death, trusting that, that is a part of our growth and our process in this life, that does require a certain amount of faith. So these, experiences are very drawn to that because of, what we talked about. And so we have to keep in mind that when you are first going into these particular Pluto 8th house cycles, you're going to delve into the experience of these symbols of power, but it's coming from a place of insecurity. We also have to remember that Pluto represents our deepest insecurities and fears. And the insecurity and the fear here is that you won't get to experience the totality of who you are, the reality of the totality of who you are, and you won't get to make the things that causes you to feel powerless into power. That's where the insecurity is coming from. This particular, compulsive need to delve into these particular topics from insecurity can lead to a sense of separation. So the shock that comes from feeling separated causes you to want to discover why that's happening. What are these insecurities coming from? It causes you to want to understand at the base and the foundation of this experience. What is deep within your psychology that causes you to have this much desire for power? So this is an interesting phase because once you dive very deeply into your own psychology, you begin to understand not just your individual psychology, but the psychology of the collective and their need, the human DNA of why human beings have this desire for power. And at the base of power, of course, it comes from the fragmentation of the soul and the need to kind of piece the fragmentations of our soul coming into this time and space dimension from the wholeness of the soul in a sense of timelessness, coming here and that being fragmented, and then we're all searching to find integration again. That's ultimately where it's coming from. But in your personal journey, you may first, when you look at psychology, you're going to dive pretty deeply into your own family dynamics. You're going to get pretty deep into looking at, the your personal relationships between your parents, what they had with each other, what you had with them, relationships between you and your siblings. Sometimes it can trace all the way back to your own family ancestry. But once you become sort of like familiar with this pattern, you begin to understand the psychology of individual beings. Things like, attachment patterns, things like codependency, gender identification, these particular building blocks of the human psyche. You begin to understand this. And when you master this, or you gain enough awareness or knowledge of this, you can then begin to be somebody who even understands spiritual psychology, understanding spiritual archetypes. So an example would be understanding things like the mitochondrial Eve and the way that, the theory that we've all come from this one particular woman in Africa, and we've all experienced a sense of rejection and separation because of that. So we have this in common, and then it feeds into our own individual psychology of, for example, codependency or attachment patterns that you have discovered. Things like the fact that, there's a gender identification that happens within individuals. This may, on a more collective or spiritual, archetypal level, be a need to reconcile the inner yin and yang dynamic, the inner masculine and feminine. It may be, a progress into the future of families, that family dynamics may begin to change in the future. The roles of, male and female roles as mother and father may switch or may change, or there may not be those roles anymore. So you begin to, become very familiar now with spiritual archetypes. So when you have this type of a understanding, knowledge, awareness, embodiment, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to feel drawn to you for advice, for, insight, okay? When people come to you for advice or insight, you may begin to feel more powerful. Now, this is an important stage in your evolution, because when you hold so much power that you can influence other people, Pluto in the 8th house individuals, you may be gravitating towards two different ways of using your power. The first way may be that you may be under the shadow of power, meaning that you know how to address people's weaknesses and manipulate knowledge so that people keep coming back to you for advice, so that you can keep that loop of feeling powerful going. So the example would be, somebody coming to you for advice, and then you tell them what the problem is within them, what their weaknesses are, and you can be very accurate, you can be very right about, that, you can be telling them the truth about that, but you may not be offering the right solutions. You may be offering a solution that incorporates or requires them to come back to you for more advice. That is a misuse of power. That's the shadow of power. And on the other hand, on a higher vibration, you may empower others. You may choose to give people advice that gives them self-sufficiency so that they no longer have to come back to you for any more advice. You can help people to purge from their past. That is the service of power and empowerment. What's going to determine how you're going to use these two, how you're going to use your power, which is going to be the shadow or is going to be the lightness of power? This is something that's going to be more instinctual. It's not going to be totally 100% conscious because it is the 8th house. But how you're going to use the power is going to depend on that stage. If we go back to your evolutionary journey, that previous stage of when you are diving into the universal symbols of power. If you have delved into the universal symbols of powers like sex, money, politics, the government, the systems, the occult, magic, death, with a need or a deep desire and a need to feel secure in being able to turn what is considered powerlessness to you into power, if it's coming from a motivation, a deeper motivation of needing to feel secure, once you get the power, you may resort to the shadow version of it. And if you have Pluto in the 8th house, like I said, this is a cycle. So there's always so because this is a cycle, if you have Pluto in the 8th house, it is necessary and it is not bad and it is crucial that you first go through the cycle of, and you probably will, the cycle of diving into the universal symbols of power from insecurity. That's generally the first cycle. So therefore, you will have that experience, okay, of using power in the shadow version of the power. And so you know that you've dived into universal symbols of power from a place of insecurity. When you are going into these experiences that requires intimacy, trust, vulnerability, and you experience relationships that are of a wound mate type. And I've made a video about soulmates versus wound mate. I'll post a link to that in the description box below and you can check out that video. But these particular wound mate relationships are crucial for you to heal from any experience in a past life or a previous life of deep powerlessness. It is necessary and it is crucial so that you can experience soulmate relationships, which comes after the cycle. So how many cycles you go through, that is not, indicated. That's going to depend on the maturity of the Pluto in the 8th house individual, the lessons that the Pluto in the 8th house individual is taking and learning. So it's not going to be the same for everybody. Some people may have one cycle and then they can break out of that compulsion and, obsession. Some people may have several cycles. And so practically, when you're in a wound mate type of a relationship, when you're trying to align yourself unconsciously with these universal symbols of power, these wound mate relationships may look like, for example, power struggles in sex, repressions in sex. Sometimes it's abuse or traumas regarding sex. It can be traumas regarding joint finances abuse regarding, money, joining finances with another person. It may be some kind of either physical or like an emotional death that you experience within yourself or the people close to you. It may be involvement with like really unhealthy dark magic or using the occult in an unhealthy way. It may be with regards to can be a bit of criminal behavior, things that are against the law. It comes to politics and the government, or you may actually be involved in corrupted behaviors in politics and the government. Okay, so once your first cycle is done, or however many cycles there are, how do we break out of this compulsive obsessive cycle of needing to dive into the universal symbol power for purposes of insecurity? If you have Pluto in the 8th house, you'll always be drawn to these universal symbols of power, but you'll have to enter them with a certain amount of security. So this means that through the lessons of these particular cycles, you begin to define or you begin to internalize your power. And internalization of power means self-sufficiency and having an ability to access your inner resources when it comes to sex, money, politics, the government, these particular laws and systems, death, magic and the occult. So in terms of sexuality, this can mean like really knowing how to please yourself sexually, really being in touch with that sexual juice within you, being able to know your boundaries in sexual experiences, for example. When it comes to the understanding of death, getting over grief that comes with death, knowing how to form strength from that, understanding the cycles of life and death. And sometimes it may mean requiring yourself to have a death of your identity, a death of a career, a death of a way of life, and knowing that you survive even through that. That's building that inner strength. When it comes to money and finances, it's going to require taking a risk, a transformation of the old ways of making money. So this can mean, having a big career change in which the way of making money is completely different, but knowing that you can still do it, you can still make it on your own. Sometimes it's, strategic planning that completely changes your life. When it comes to, politics or governments or systems, this can mean, being able to be within the system, yet having independence in a particular area, having freedom and independence in your own life without getting yourself into like criminal behavior. What does that look like to you, for example? When it comes to, the magic of the occult, definitely being able to intuitively use these particular systems in generating a sense of truth, in generating insight into your life, in generating faith in what's coming up for you in life, for example, without needing to use it to manipulate other people's behavior, other people's minds, other people's way of thinking, using it for yourself and letting that be an example of how others may use the occult for themselves. That kind of made sense? So once you have this particular security of your inner power, you can then begin to dive into these universal symbols of power, whatever they may be, and be that person that people want to come to for advice because you have a deep understanding of your psychology now. And then you can use power for service in the vibration of the lightness of power and not the darkness of power anymore. And this is when, when you are diving into these universal symbols of power, and I feel like I'm saying this word over and over again, but yes, when you're diving in here, you may begin to experience soulmate relationships now, meaning that the sexual experiences that you have opens up a new door for you to understand and discover yourself, but not in a way where there's definitely growth, but not in a way where the two people are hurting each other, in a sense that they're both in it for a need, for some kind of need, that once the need is fulfilled, they leave the relationship, causing hurt and pain. The two people come into the relationship with a certain amount of wholeness within them already, but having room for growth. And the growth, can be what two people, or maybe 3 or 4, a group of people, help each other with. But it is not coming in fragmented, coming into any type of relationship fragmented and hoping to get something from another individual, because that, once those needs are fulfilled, the two people part ways feeling hurt, not sure why. There's a separation, this breakup. Or maybe one person initiates it and then the other person is hurt. Or it's this breaking of trust, breaking of loyalty, abuse or manipulation. That is the wound mate type of a relationship. The soulmate type doesn't need to have manipulation or control, but will still offer a certain amount of growth and healing in a relationship. There's boundaries there. And of course, if you have Pluto in the 8th house, if you could internalize your own power, you know what your boundaries are. And you're willing to stand up for those boundaries. Yes, there are so many soulmates out there for you, not just one, but there can be many, 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 and you are open to that with Pluto in the 8th house. So yes, beautiful souls, I think that's going to be my interpretation of Pluto in the 8th house. And if this resonates with you, do leave a comment below and let us know what your experiences have been. If you'd like this video, give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button if you haven't. My website is currently down right now because I'm upgrading my services, but stay tuned, it's coming back and I'm going to be having new services offered and available for you guys. So yes, I'll see you soon then, beautiful souls. Bye!